Welcome to 247 Real Talk. I'm your host, Julian Perry. It's a pleasure to be here with you once again for the 247 Real Talk podcast. I hope you had a great week. It's been great summer weather. We had a real rainy week in New York, but we welcomed the rain after 2 consecutive heat waves. And as of this evening, we're into heat wave number 3. Me personally, I love it. I hate the winter. When I first came to this country 40 years ago, I used to love the winters, but as you get older and your bones get older with you, the winter is not so palatable anymore. I hope you all had a great week. I hope that you accomplished all the things you set out to do. I hope you've been paying attention to what's going on in the news as we go through what was a struggling time with very few options to a time of hope, a time of a diversity, a time of options, a time that at least there are choices that the American people have to make. On this week's episode, I'm going to talk about, and I'm digressing again from the episode I had planned, but President Biden proposed a few bills to Congress, I believe, and one of them is term limits for the Supreme Court. Now, I have mentioned this a few times before in previous podcasts, but I think we're at a point where we need to have a little bit more conversation about it because we see what the Supreme Court is all about and how its current design may or may not fit modern times. So sit back, relax, and I'll be right back with you. So welcome back to 247 Real Talk podcast. It's about 6 minutes after 10 p.m. on Wednesday, July 31st. Believe it or not, tomorrow is August 1st. We have one unofficial month left of summer, and then there's Labor Day, and then we go into the season of holidays and Christmas and elections and all the other things we look forward to. You know, I personally look forward to the fall. I get to ride my bike more often. I get to, because, you know, in summertime you do it too, but it's kind of hot, you know, with helmets. Even when I've got an airflow helmet, it's still kind of warm. There's something beautiful about autumn. There's something beautiful about spring, apart from the allergy season, that we should enjoy. There's something beautiful about this world we live in, and as we watch changing seasons, it's so important to pay attention, as people would say, to stop and smell the roses. That's a lesson that I'm learning more and more in life as I get older. I was always on the grind, always going. I have to do this, have to do that, have to do this, have to do that. But as time has gone on, I've begun to realize not only should I follow the lessons that others have been trying to teach me, in terms of taking a step back, but I've come to a point where I want it now. I want to cut down on the number of projects I set myself to make use of every single waking moment and smell the roses, spend more time with family, go outdoors and ride, enjoy nature, see what all those things I've been missing because my schedule's been so hectic. So I would invite you to do the same, no matter your age, no matter the stage you are in life, because more and more things happen that bring to reality the fact that tomorrow is not promised. It's cliche, right? We say tomorrow is not promised, and we take it with such a grain of salt until we recognize that it really isn't. I've been praying for a friend of mine who, it's about 6 weeks now. He had a coma. He's younger than I am, and he had a stroke, and he's been in a coma for 6 weeks so far. Last I heard a few days ago, there's been some slight improvements, but you know, it's all in God's hands. But to recognize that he was someone who worked hard too. And, you know, I've always heard these people, especially people who have a lot of money. You ever notice people who have a lot of money say work hard and play hard? I've perfected the work hard part. I'm now, being tutored or tutoring myself into the play hard part as well. So there's enough balance in life. I haven't got onto my topic yet, but I wanted to share these few things with you because I have to tell you too that work from home, having 2 days to work from home I can't tell you how much it has added to the value of life. I mean, we work more, right? Because I'm in front of my computer and I don't have my 2 hour commute back and forth. It's about a little less than that, but when you add the going back and forth, it's like just short of 2 hours total each day. Okay, for 5 days, that's approximately 10 hours of commuting. So when you have 2 days work from home, which is what I have now, that's 4 days of your life you've gotten back, not sitting on the train, not, just being able to wake up a little later, get a little bit more sleep, see my children earlier, spend time with my family, enjoy the weather outdoors, because when you're finished work, instead of commuting, you can go outdoors and enjoy it. And yet I've still spent more time in front of my computer, giving a little bit more effort and time to the job because it's okay. Having that freedom to get up in the morning and have a cup of coffee and log on and go through my emails and maybe attend a few meetings and then get up after that to the break and go have a shower and eat something. Those freedoms, those things that we become so rigid with because we were going to work 5 days a week, that enjoying the flexibility of now is so great. So I'm going to move on to the topic, which is what I said President Biden suggested or brought to the floor, and that is term limits for Supreme Courts, or SCOTUS, right? Supreme Court of the United States. Let me give you some background as to why I will speak from this perspective. I grew up in I grew up in the United States, but I grew up in the Caribbean. My early years were in the Caribbean. I think I've mentioned this to you before. I won't mention country, place, or anything because I don't want people to get distracted from my point. In the Caribbean, those islands and those countries, South America, Caribbean, many of them follow British structure. Let's call it that. So in the United States of America, the highest court in the land is the Supreme Court. In the British system, the highest court in the land is the appeal court. They follow the ideology that you go through the lower courts and then you go to the Supreme Court. And when you go to the Supreme Court, depending on the decision, you have a last shot at appealing the Supreme Court's decision, and the decisions made by the appeal court are final unless you're in one of the islands who contributes or who's a member of the Caribbean Court of Justice. And then there's still, if you're a member of the Caribbean Court of Justice, then you have one more level of appeal to bring your case to the Caribbean Court of Justice. So suffice to say, for an island or a country in the Caribbean, the appeal court is the highest court in the land. I speak from a place of knowledge because my father was a land court judge, a Supreme Court judge, an appeal court judge. He's acted as Chief Justice on multiple occasions. So I'm well versed in the concepts of law and perspective and ideology from that part of the world. So I was a little surprised when I first delved into that arena here and found out that on the Supreme Court of the United States, your appointment is a lifetime. I tried to wrap my mind around the positives of it, and there are positives of it that I found. I think the design of having the Supreme Court judges be for life was so that they were immune to the pressures that can be applied for your job security, right? I mean, removing a Supreme Court judge is, you have to use articles of impeachment. Otherwise, the Supreme Court judge either has the option to retire, resign, or they're there until their death. And again, I think in more innocent times, The ideology was impartiality could be preserved by having a Supreme Court judge never worry that if it made a decision according to the law that was against a president or some powerful body, that they had to consider losing their job. So when I heard President Biden talk about term limits, and I've spoken of it before, when I spoke about it before, we've been going through this transition period in this country where, in my opinion, the Supreme Court of the United States has been deviating from pure interpretation of the law to add some flavor of partisan ideology. Thus, we keep referring to the Supreme Court less about the letter of the law and more about liberal and conservative. The problem with your political ideology in that judicial body is that we have gone to a place where it seems to be adding flavor to decisions, where we very rarely see decisions made where there's either a unanimous court or a decision made where we see a mixture of the so-called liberal and conservatives intermingling in the decision that there's the partisan lines are inconspicuous. Forgive me if I'm blinking for those on YouTube, but my allergies are really bothering me tonight. So, as I think about the system my father was in, there's a retirement age, and I believe that age is 58. In the case of my father and many judges, because of their knowledge, because of their years of service, because of the need, because of the process of hiring new judges and someone who gets seasoned enough to get those positions, many judges who reach retirement age are offered renewals where they get to stay on to the court. And I think my father retired, don't get me wrong, but it was much later past 58 years. It was well into his upper 60s. And at the time, the ideology is to groom younger judges, newer judges, or less seasoned judges in the law, in precedence, in impartiality, and in the ability to assume those positions when the more seasoned, the more senior judges retire. The benefit of that system is that you get to recycle. And let me add a twist in there. So there's a body called the Judicial Service Commission. And the Judicial Service Commission is usually made up of judges from the judiciary. It's usually made up of, I think, don't quote me on this, but I think officials from, in most cases, you still end up with two parties, right? Two political parties that are at the top. And I think there's representation from each. And all this lends to a more even, it has to be a unanimous decision to appoint a judge. Judges who apply for those positions are questioned in front of the Judicial Service Commission. And so there's a better chance of, at least, it's like going for a job interview. It's having someone present themselves and get an understanding of this person's ability, both on the letter of the law and their ability to be impartial, their historical conduct as a person and their historical conduct in the legal field. So that is the main difference. And knowing that these judges will retire means a few things. It means that we're not stuck with a judge who decides that they're partial, partisan, extreme liberal or conservative, and will influence every single decision made in the court, no longer according to the letter of the law, no longer according to impartiality, but according to their political ideology and according to their loyalty to members of their political party. In the system in the Caribbean, if that does occur, there's an end in sight. There's an end in sight because you know this person will retire. Now, there's other political nuances in there, right? Where sometimes political parties break the law and keep someone on even longer than they should be on the bench, but eventually they will leave. It's not a lifetime appointment. And the ability for new blood, not only new blood to interpret the law, but times change. Someone who interpreted the law 50 years ago, if the exact same case was brought before the Supreme Court today, the interpretation would be quite different. The world has changed. If the world is ever changing and we don't have people who are interpreting the law and applying it to current times, we are in a conundrum. We're stuck in this political ideology, this political battle. I think that maybe, just maybe, we should look at reforming the practice of having a president appoint a judge for the Supreme Court as well. What I like about the practice in the Caribbean and the Judicial Service Commission is that there are now enough representatives in a way that it's as even as you can get it. And so that unanimous vote to appoint a judge comes less from a place of political ideology and more from a place of having to look at this person through the set of eyes of morals and ethics and knowledge and fitness, because they have to get over the hump of a president who gets his whole party to agree with him, where most of the voting members of his party don't even bother to research the judge's credentials. They just go with what the president says, who is in power at the time, because he's the president. With a governing body like the Judicial Service Commission, that body is more invested in appointing judges from a different perspective, not from a perspective of, oh, well, my president is, I'm not even going to bother to find out about this candidate because I have to question him, right? So as I think about what President Biden suggested in terms of term limits, and when I heard in the news, they did go on to say that based on our divided Congress, what would be required, and if I am correct, I believe something like changing from lifetime appointments, which is a constitutional appointment, to term limits would require a constitutional congressional change, which would require a 2/3 majority vote in Congress, which is impossible to get now based on our Congress, based on the Senate, based on the House of Representatives, based on how partisan it is, based on the infighting, based on the aristocracy, and based on the fact that they're more interested in their careers, their power, than the people who elected them. And they're more interested in keeping their power and their wealth than actually doing what they're put there to do, and that is work for the people, for this great nation called the United States of America. The Congress that we have now should not be resenting the United States of America or doing work on behalf of the people of the United States of America. They should just be called a Congress for the states, because they themselves as leaders have forgotten to lead by example and have completely erased the word and the concept of unity from their positions that they have been elected to. So we are talking about basically just discussing what it would mean in terms of having term limits, knowing that judges will eventually come off the bench, and having the ability for new blood, people who have lived in today's time, people who understand how the world has changed, people who see things through different lenses and have interpretations of the law that are more relevant to today, and people who can be moved out of the way when they've exhibited lawless, they've exhibited bad behavior as a judge, and are able to stay where they are because the process of impeachment and a partisan Congress and is the chances of impeaching a judge are so difficult given our divisive but almost evenly matched Congress in terms of political ideology, conservative and liberal. Maybe we'll get this to change one day. I think the only way that would change is so let's be realistic. I don't think at this point the Republican Party is on board with term limits. So given today's climate, it would require the Democratic Party to have more than 2/3 of the members of Congress to make this, to get a vote passed to make this congressional change. If tomorrow that position changed, it would take then more than 2/3, it would take 2/3 vote, which means it would have to be 2/3 Republicans who would agree with this change. I don't think I'll see this change in my lifetime. I'm hoping that because I see hope in Generation Z, that one day this will happen. I know that some of you listen to my vision and say, no way. You say no way not because you don't want the same things I speak about or have the same desires I do, but because we all recognize that the world is not getting better. It's getting worse. This episode is on Supreme Court of the United States, but I hope you've been paying attention to the news this week about the escalation of the war where in Israel, where Hezbollah is involved and Iran is involved. And a few episodes ago or several episodes ago, I talked about this impending doom of World War III. When I spoke to some people after that episode, several people agreed, but I think more people said, nah, that's not going to happen anytime soon. These things happen with the flip of a switch, literally almost. And so the way our world is going, the anger in our world, the unrest in our world has gotten to a place where the world is erupting in chaos and anger. For those of you who've been paying attention, there was recently an election in Venezuela where there's a dictator that runs Venezuela, which is communist, and where the opposing, they recently had an election and the opponent definitely by all accounts won 73% of the vote, yet the dictator is declaring himself the winner. And this is a situation that unless President Biden steps in, the United States steps in, this will go on. But we can't just step in, because when we step in, remember I said World War III, now we deal with the communist blowback of North Korea and China and Russia. I know that President Biden had made a deal with President Maduro, who is the dictator president in Venezuela, that if he allowed free or fair elections, that we would do something about the sanctions that are crippling that country and have crippled it for years. Earlier in his presidency, President Biden had lifted the sanctions, and based on President Maduro's behavior, he had reimposed the sanctions. So I'm waiting, those of you who've been paying attention, I'm waiting with bated breath to see what happens next. But we still have these battles at home here to deal with. I would like to know your thoughts about the Supreme Court of the United States. I'd like to know your thoughts. I'd like to hear from women and their feelings about Roe versus Wade. And when I say that, some might want to jump to the conclusion that, oh, women are going to go up in arms, but I was shocked to find out how many women, especially older women, live under that, what's the word I want to use? They live in that past time of male chauvinism, of being subjected to the man to the point where their opinion is his opinion because they're his wife. And so they will go against other women who feel strongly about having the right to choose what happens to their bodies. So it is an interesting time. We've got an even more interesting time in who we have as a presumptive candidate for the Democratic Party and how this will play out, how the American people will vote, how much of the partisanship can be put aside so that we can look at both candidates and choose what's best for. First word, United States of America. Before I end this episode, I want to again give credit where credit is due. Earlier on, when I first used to have every episode about student loans, I once again will commend the Biden administration for finding every loophole there is legally within the powers of the Department of Education to give relief to many people who have been struggling and with so many or such high student debt that they have had to put the American dream on hold for 10 and 20 years and more. And when they finish that in 10 and 20 years, or remember student loans, most of the time you take out for 30 years, they then have to start saving for a home to possibly get, if that's their desire, a piece of the American dream. We cannot ignore the fact that the income-driven repayment system was so flawed, and I see that they're attacking that now piece by piece. We cannot ignore the fact that so many universities were allowed to go into business not as an educational institution that had good financial practices to keep it in place and benefit its students, but to go into business as a so-called education institution that was actually a capitalist business, for-profit business that put their pockets first and the students last, not second, but last, so that students would graduate under a mountain of debt, thinking that they were going to get an education and be able to repay these loans simultaneously on a parallel plane while building towards the American dream. But the oppressiveness of the loans, the oppressiveness of the federal government to charge interest on a loan to students who are going to work and give their all right back to this society. That's something else that the Biden administration maybe can tackle. I'm not sure they can accomplish it. There should be no interest on the loans. The people who take those loans don't leave America. There's probably 0.001% who leave America to go to work in another country. They give back their all for the rest of their lives right here. So when cases like this go to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court sides with those who received millions of dollars of PPP loans and got them forgiven, to knock down efforts by the president to take some burdens off the American people. When the Supreme Court can't interpret not only by law but by common sense and reality to say systemic racism is real, and so many people of color, people of women, people of LGBTQI, all these people have been subjected to a systemic racism that ensures that they earn less than their Caucasian counterparts. When none of that is considered, and they simply side with their partisan and political ideology to continue oppressing American people, citizens of the United States of America, so that the wealth divide and the socioeconomic oppression can continue. We need term limits. We need a change. It's time for United States of America to be shaken beyond its core in the right direction. I'm not telling you who to vote for. I never do my show along partisan lines. But I will say that I am one of those people who is ready for change at every level. I'm ready to see fresh new blood at every level. I'm ready to see the America that I know give opportunities to everyone, regardless of race, creed, color, gender, sexual orientation, personal choices, to use their credibility, their integrity, to be a part of molding our future and the future of the United States of America for our children. Ponder these things for a while. Send me your thoughts. Podcast at 247realtalk.net. That's the email address. I love hearing your comments. I love having conversations with you. And I want to applaud you and thank you for keeping it civil, even when you disagree with me. I've come on this show many times and owned up to changing or being led to a change in my thought process because I had conversations with people who disagree and who eloquently and professionally and with all integrity shared and debated the topic with me. Thank you ever so much, as always, for being able to be a part of your household, for being able to be a part of your lives. I pray that you have a wonderful week ahead. I want to always say thank you to my subscribers, to my new subscribers, even though that has slowed. I hope that you come again and you come in force and join us in this cause in making a difference in this great nation of ours. Please like, please subscribe if you haven't, and please, please, please share the podcast. Share it with people who share your enthusiasm and share it with people who couldn't care less. Because even those who couldn't care less are open as human beings to change if the message is right. And I hope my message resonates with enough of you. It obviously has, with the thousands or tens of thousands of downloads and the few thousand subscribers and growing that I have. Again, I thank you so much, ever so much, for being a part of this journey and for supporting me in my mission to give back to this world, to give back to this country, to give back to humanity, so that I can feel that each and every day I earn my right to occupy a place on this planet. Do have a great weekend and a great week ahead. For those of you who are in New York, we're about to enter another heat wave. It's going to feel like 100 for the next few days. Stay cool, stay hydrated, stay safe, stay blessed. And until the next time, please take care of yourselves and each other.